Hello, it's Carrie with Salvia and Sage. Welcome to my very first video. Today we're going to be talking about silverware, and it's one of my favorite things to collect. I collect it in lots of various forms. I love older antique pieces, and I have a few things to share with you today. Hopefully you learned something, and feel free to ask questions. Feel free to type a comment down down below. And if I don't know the answer, I love a good rabbit hole. So give me an excuse to search the internet for interesting information and I will jump on it. So let's talk a little bit about I think rather than talking about sterling versus silver plate versus stainless versus other forms of silverware, let's just hit it from a history point of view, because that's kind of my thing. I consider myself a history nerd. My very favorite thing to do when I found something old at an antique store or a thrift store or an estate sale is to go home and dive down the rabbit hole of finding out about the piece, where it's from, who made it, what it's made of. And these are the things that I enjoy. So at Salvia and Sage, when I say I specialize in history you can hold, that is what I mean. I love the fact that I can pick up a piece, find out that it was made by a silversmith between 1822 and 1867, and I can think about the number of celebrations that piece has probably participated in, the different households that it has been a part of, the way it's been passed down through the generations. And I feel that my goal with Salvia and Sage is finding those pieces and introducing them to a new family, I say timeless treasures for a new generation to love. That's kind of my little catchphrase. And that's because I love the history behind these pieces, and I want them to continue being handed down from person to person so that these pieces have life for a few hundred more years or more. So because I love the history of things, let's kind of start talking about silverware in early America. So, silver has been used throughout the millennia. It has been used for decoration. It has been used for purpose. It's been a very big part of coinage throughout all of the world for most of all time. In the 1700s and 1800s, most of the world was on a silver standard, meaning their currency was based on silver bullion. And so in America, in the 1600s, most of the silver that was here was imported in the form of coin. And coin had a standard of silver purity or silver fineness throughout most of the world. In most of the world, that standard was about 90% silver alloyed with other metals, usually copper. And so the first example I want to share with you is one of coin silver. This is a spoon stamped with a maker's mark that dates it, that silversmith was active in Philadelphia between 1822 and the 1860s, meaning this spoon likely predates the Civil War. But what's interesting, even more so than that, is that silver as a metal, as a precious metal, it's very reusable. This spoon likely took some other form even before it was coin. It may have been it may have been in production from I'm getting tongue-tied. The silver in this spoon could have been used in coin from the 1400s. That's kind of the thing that I geek out about when I hold a piece of silver. So this coin silver, as I mentioned, the term coin silver as we use it refers to two things. One, it refers to what is the raw material that the utensil is made from, and the raw material was coin. whether that would be imported coinage from other European nations, which it likely was. In early America, we started minting our own coinage in the 1790s, but we weren't harvesting a lot of raw material here. I'm from Colorado, and silver as a mining industry is huge out here, but that wasn't really happening until the late 1800s. And so most of the raw material that was brought into America was in the form of other countries' currency. And so that coin silver, when we call it that, is referring to the raw material that was used to make it. But it's also referring, as I mentioned, to a standard of fineness, which is 90% silver alloyed with another metal, usually copper. So coin silver is kind of the earliest and most common form of silverware that we saw in early Americas, and it remained popular until after the Civil War. At that time, families were starting to look to England. We had always been importing European silver, and England has always sort of been the hallmark or the gold standard for, I guess that would be the silver standard, for fine silverwares, flatware and hollowware. And in the late 1800s, makers started hearing this demand for, oh, well, that's not as good, meaning this coin silverware, that's not as good as what I can get from England, the sterling from England. And so based on consumer demand, silversmiths here in America started turning more towards a sterling standard. And so moving along, talking about sterling. Sterling actually has a definition. I'm sure you've heard it before. Sterling silver, like jewelry, earrings, bracelets, that kind of thing. We use that word, but it actually has a definition and laws regarding it. So sterling as a concept and a definition of fineness has been in use in England since the 1300s. And the definition is that it is 92.5% silver alloyed with another material, once again, usually copper. And the reason it needs to be alloyed, you might say, well, why not just create something out of 100% silver? And the reason for that is that silver is a bit soft and it wouldn't make a great material for a utensil, something that needs to be able to take a beating and be used. It would be useless probably after one or two times using it. It would bend, it would dent. So silversmiths alloy silver with another metal, once again, usually copper, for strength. And England set forth that standard in the 1300s. We adopted it in the late 1800s and actually enacted laws surrounding the markings. Our laws that surround markings are not nearly as robust as England's. There are all kinds of checks and balances around markings for English sterling, but we do require by law that sterling is marked. And usually that mark is either the word sterling, a fraction 925 over 1,000, indicating that standard of fineness that we talked about. Or occasionally you'll see STER or other markings, but regardless, it's required to be marked. That's good for you as a consumer to know, because you don't want to be duped, because there's a very big difference in the intrinsic value of something made from sterling versus something that is silver plated. So we'll talk about that in a second. So as I mentioned, in the 1800s, consumers, families started demanding sterling that was as good as, or silverware that was as good as the English imports. And so silversmiths responded and started creating that. I have a few examples of, not early, this is not early American, but I mentioned that demand started around the 1800s. This is a child's sterling spoon in the pattern that Gorham makes called Chantilly. and they started producing that in the late 1800s, so consistent with that demand that I mentioned. And this is a good example of some of that late 1800s sterling that I mentioned. And you're not going to be able to see it on this video, I know, but it is marked here at the heel, well, sort of where the handle meets the heel, with the full word sterling. It also has marks that Gorham, it has a maker's mark from Gorham, and Gorham institutes some other types of marks that date their pieces. Here's another piece of American sterling. This one is made by Frank Smith in the pattern Fiddle Thread. And you'll notice also, neither of these pieces are polished up and brilliant and shining, and I could easily do that if I wanted, but I like the patina of the older, somewhat tarnished sterling. That's just a preference of mine. So when you see me hold up my pieces, there's nothing lower in quality about this patinaed or lightly tarnished silver. It has the same intrinsic worth. This is just a preference that I have to leave that natural patina. Okay, back to this Frank Smith Fiddle Thread. This is a pattern from the early 1900s, meant to sort of mimic the French flatware of the 1700s. In fact, this fiddle thread pattern, Thomas Jefferson, you know, as if you're a Hamilton musical lover, you already know this, or if you're just a history buff, then you already know that Jefferson spent a long time in France as an ambassador, and came home to Monticello with a large service of French silver flatware in a pattern very similar to this fiddle thread. Moving along to, this is my personal flatware pattern that I collect. This is something called repoussé. Repoussé is the name of this pattern, but it is also the name of a technique for decorating silver that involves hammering silver into a hammering silver into a relief or a carving that why am I having so much trouble with my words? Hammering silver into a carved pattern so that the silver takes the relief of that pattern. And you can't see this very well. It is, I love gardening, and this is a floral pattern with lots of different florals and leaves and greenery. So this is my personal flatware pattern, is repoussé. And I don't actually even know if I'm saying that correctly. That could be the hick version of how you say that. But that's how I'm gonna say it. Somebody else correct me if you want to. You probably know from your American history who Paul Revere was. Did you know, you may know, obviously his role as a founding father in our country, but he was a silversmith by trade. And he did not make this that I'm about to show you, but this pattern of sterling is named after him. It is called Paul Revere, and Toll makes this pattern. It is, you're not going to be able to see it, but it is marked here on the handle with the word sterling. So those are a few examples of the sterling that I have. Moving on, it wasn't first invented in the Industrial Revolution. Silver plate actually, as a technique, was invented in England in the late 1700s in a technique called Sheffield plate. And it was when a layer of copper was sandwiched and fused between two sheets of silver, sterling silver, and using heat, they made this sandwiched, fused, plated, what am I trying to say? Why are words so hard for me this morning? It was a form of silver plate. And then the silversmith could then fashion flatware, hollowware, whatever he was wanting to make after sheeting it that way. But more commonly in the 70s, let's say, it became more common to electroplate silver. And that was when an actual current of electricity was used on a lesser expensive piece of metal, sometimes nickel, sometimes copper, actual 100%, well, it's usually never 100%, 3 nines fine is what they say, 99.9% fine silver in a very thin layer was plated on top of a cheaper metal. And some people don't like silver plate because they think it, well, it's true. The intrinsic value of silver plate is less because it isn't worth, it doesn't have the inherent worth because it is primarily made from a cheaper metal. But I love silver plate, number one, because some of the patterns, especially the older silver plate from the late 1800s, early 1900s, is very intricate. And I love, this happens to be my favorite pattern of silver plate. It's called Charter Oak, and it has acorns and oak leaves on the handle. If you turn it around, it has a 360-degree pattern with more acorns and oak leaves. This is even down here at where the handle meets the bowl of the spoon. There's acorns. Anyhow, my favorite. So does it have the same intrinsic value? No. But is it absolutely worth your time to collect and use? Yeah. It is affordable. It is beautiful. It is usable, meaning, well, all of this is usable, 100% usable. I use my sterling, my silver plate, not just for fancy occasions. Sometimes I'm using sterling with a paper plate because it is meant to be used. And so you can start a collection of silver plate at a very beginner-friendly entry price, and it's beautiful. Here is another example of some early 1900s silver plate. This pattern sometimes I get confused. I have two coordinating grape patterns. One is vintage and one is Levine. Sorry that I can't remember at the moment which is which, but I mean, it's very intricate and it's beautiful and it shines up. And if you use it regularly, it doesn't tarnish quickly. And I think it makes a lovely look. Just like take the stainless out of your silverware drawer and fill it with a variety of silver plate and just use it. So here's my favorite is the antique silver plate, the stuff from the late 1800s and early 1900s, because it's intricate, it's heavy. There was more, I feel like, I might just be making this up, but it feels more quality. As we start to progress through the decades, let me show you something here. This is still a very heavy piece, and I feel like a very well-made piece of silver plate. This is in the pattern Ambassador, and I believe this one is from roughly 1917. But the styles vary widely and changed quite a bit throughout the decades. As we move more to the mid-century, this pattern is the Magnolia pattern, and it's still beautiful. Can you see that? But it is it's much lighter. I feel as though the workmanship and the quality is not quite the same as the older silver plate. But once again, very low entry price to get these. Sometimes if you're at the thrift store, you can often get these for 25 cents each. Not always. Sometimes it depends on the thrift store and it depends on whether they're having a sale. But I think it's beautiful. Even you don't have to collect the 12 place settings of all the same pattern. It's beautiful to mix and match. And if you are interested in that, you can do that for very, very affordably. Another mid-century pattern, you can see that the intricacy is just not there. The weight and the heft, you can't tell that on a video, but I'm just relaying it to you. It's just not there. The iced tea spoon is pretty light. Now, that doesn't mean that this is not cool and not beautiful. It's just the tastes changed and the processes changed as the centuries progressed. Let's see, what are some other things? Oh, I mentioned coin silver, sterling silver, silver plate, and sort of the fineness standard here in America is sterling, that 92.5% silver alloyed with another metal. And I mentioned we copied that from England, who's been using that all the way back from the 1300s. But other countries have their own standards for fineness. And I have two examples of those. German silver they have more than one fineness standard in Germany, but oftentimes when you hear the phrase German silver, you're referring to 800 silver or 80% silver mixed with another metal, alloyed with another metal. And it is often marked 800, which just stands for, it's on a thousandths scale. That's a hard word to say. Thousandths scale, 800 parts of silver out of 1,000 total parts. This little guy is cute. I use this often for charcuterie. I have some little, this is a demi-tasse spoon, but I also have some little charcuterie forks, and he's super cute. I don't know if you can see him very well, but he's a little band player, and if you turn him around, he has 360 degrees of details. You see his waistcoat, his braid, his instrument. I just think that's cute. So this is an example of German silver. I also have an example of Scandinavian silver. And same thing, I use this with my charcuterie boards, or little appetizer boards. The fineness gradient, or the fineness assay, I guess is the better word, for Scandinavian silver has eluded me at the moment. I want to say, I better not make it up. I'll go look it up and I'll put it down in the comments. But this is a piece of silver with lots of intricacy, sort of in that Nordic style. I don't know if you can see that. But all that to say, I just wanted to show you some examples of the fact that other countries have different fineness standards for silver. And there is a wealth of information on the internet. If you're not sure what you've picked up at the thrift store, where you can start diving in and going down that rabbit hole, as I say. I will put some links to some really interesting articles under this video, because as I mentioned, my primary interest in this hobby has to do with the history of the piece. And that may have nothing to do with your interest, but if there are any other fellow history nerds out there, you can click on those articles and learn more. Anyhow, I hope you learned something new. Please ask me questions. And if you're interested in purchasing any pieces from me, on Etsy, I do have a variety of silver plate, a little bit of sterling listed. I don't have any coin listed at the moment because I am hoarding this one because of its age, and because the history nerd in me is geeking out that I can hold something from before the Civil War. But I'm always on the hunt for more pieces, and if you're in the market for something particular, let me know, because I love a mission. I love a reason to sift through things at estate sales and in thrift stores to find you something. So feel free to commission me. And I hope you guys are having a great day. I look forward to putting out more information for you. Maybe I'll do a deep dive one day on sterling, and a deep dive on coin, and a deep dive on silver plate. I might be the only person in the world that would be super interested in those topics, but I did find out, just FYI, one of the articles that I'll link to is the curator for the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation Medals Collection actually has a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in silver. So there are people who have this disease worse than me. Anyhow, I hope you guys have a great day. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Sorry for shaking the camera. I'll see you soon. Bye.